thank you for being here. Really happy to have some really good presenters here. Our first one is Russ Kashian, who has been a professor here at the university for how long, Russ?
23 years.
23 years, so very seasoned. Been great to work with. He's also in charge of the FERC, which is a Fiscal and Economic Research Center, and so we've done some projects with him. Great to work with any of the businesses. I would recommend if you want to do some research projects, it's very reasonably priced and they can really get some good data, so I'm putting a little plug in for Russ. But he recently did a study that I believe was funded by Realty, so on housing, and I know in particular they did look at Walworth County. So what we thought was we'd have Russ kind of go through, spend maybe 10 minutes or something just laying out what he has found with that to set the groundwork a little bit on our discussion about housing. And then we have two other presenters here and speakers that will be part of a panel where we talk through some different examples of what have been happening and just what trends and things like that we're seeing in housing. And what I'm hoping for this event actually is that it really kind of sets the stage to do a bigger event, hopefully 3-4 months down the line, where we focus specifically on housing and what we can do in the county. So this is just the first kind of attempt to get it out there. We are videotaping it, and we definitely want to share it with a lot of our municipal leaders who aren't able to attend today, and school leaders and other people that are developers and people that might be able to help us with this. So with that, I'd like to invite Russ up, and Russ, you can
Go down for a second.
So this is actually an interesting slide. We were asked to look at affordable housing. And one of the things to keep in mind about affordable housing is my philosophy is you cannot build affordable housing. Affordable housing is used housing. New housing is not affordable. And so what you have to keep doing is building newer housing, and the existing housing basically filters down. It's a horrible way to phrase it, but it's what my dissertation was on. And because of the cost of land, the cost of lumber, the cost of workers, there is no way you can build a $200,000 unit. But if you build enough $400,000 units, stuff starts filtering down. And that's where we started. Over here, we looked at the problem in the region. And what we found is these three counties, Jefferson, Walworth, and Columbia, the value of the houses there exceed the mean. But the wages are below the mean. Which means people live there but have to go to Dane County to work. Or they have to go to Waukesha County to work. Because they love to live in Jefferson County, Walworth County, Columbia County. But they can't afford to work there. And so you are exporters of workers. This is, and today with gas at $5 a gallon, this may not be sustainable. And I use sustainable in a business sense. Because I come into work here, I live in Muskego, Wisconsin, where I serve on the Board of Zoning Appeals, I think. I come in 6 days a week. Right now I'm coming in 5 days because it costs me $16 to come into work. I'm not, by the way, looking for a new job because there's no university in Muskego. So we don't have to worry about that. But this is the problem. I mean, Dane County is an importer of labor. Waukesha County is an importer of labor. And these guys over here, Rock County, the housing values are less, the wages are less, but people work there. So it's kind of an interesting conundrum that Walworth County faces. And so I just wanted to bring this one up because I just happen to have it on my desktop. Here is the study that we did on housing, and I'm going to make it really fast. Basically, The problem we have, I'm quickly going through this because, is an inventory problem. The Realtors Association says that they need a 6-month supply of housing. So if we sell this many housing, X number of housing in a period of time, there should be 6 times that on the market at any given time. You know, it's kind of like toilet paper at the pick and save. You know, we need to have inventory, and I talk to a lot of realtors, and realtors are concerned because, you know, if you don't sell, you don't make any money. So you need inventory. Last summer we were at 3, I guarantee you we're below 3. 3 months of inventory, which, what?
2.7.
2.7, which means it's a seller's market. If it's that, because there may not be any buyers because they've given up. Well, at some point you give up. And so we're not, home price appreciation in our county, in the state, 34% in 2020, 43%. And it's consistently, Walworth County is a popular place to live. It constantly exceeds that of the state. And so, not only don't you have the inventory, but people are bidding up the prices to get what they can. I was in my hometown the other day of South Milwaukee, where I grew up, and I just drove around for the heck of it. South Milwaukee's affordable housing. It's a wonderful place. I had a great childhood. Go there all the time. I couldn't find a single house for sale. Not one. I'm driving up and down streets, it's a grid in South Milwaukee. No, nothing for sale. So you know when this house goes up, someone's gonna basically grab it, and you're gonna see price appreciation. Affordability, you know, the problem is, of course, that, and it's percentage of homeowner households within each bracket whose housing costs are 20% or more of household income. Walworth County. And in many cases, because the housing costs are higher. The income is lower, right? The housing costs are higher. The math doesn't work. And then, once again, they have to then leave the county to get employment. Projected future demand, pardon me, will exceed historic supply. The problem is not getting better. One of the reasons we have a shortage in housing in America today is because after the 2008-2010 housing bubble crash, we didn't build. We took a vacation for 5 years. And so if you're a math person like me, the integrated area under the curve has to be compensated in the later period. Man, we're in calculus now. That's impossible, you can't. You're chasing an elusive dream by saying, we have to build in 2022 houses we should have built in 2012. That's what we're saying. So if we go into a recession, which I believe we will, I don't think it'll be deep, I don't think it'll be abysmal, but we're going to slow down building housing again. So if we slow down in 2023 and 2024, this problem becomes worse. Because the demand will continue to increase. My sons cannot live at home forever. And so we have to be cognizant of what's going on downstream. Anytime we stop building houses means we will have a shortage down the road. And that's what the shortage we project will be. 4,300 units. Because We looked at the Department of Administration's population projections. We looked at the Census Bureau's population projections. And we took the lower one. And then we said, if we build today as we built in the last decade, how much will we be short? Well, that's a big number. And we can actually have lower population growth, as possible. The other problem we have in the county is that our rents, they're not rising as bad, but they're rising. And it's because of an opportunity. You know, we have an opportunity to make, I'm a landlord, I own a rental property. I mean, I'm not in it for the accolades, I mean, I'm in it for the money. We're recording this. And then the biggest problem is Alice households. Alice households are households, they're not impoverished. I was not an impoverished child. However, we didn't have an oven for 3 years. Because my parents had a choice. They could fix the oven or pay the mortgage. I have it on my computer somewhere. There's a series of pictures of my sister making turkey on the Weber grill. My sister could actually make a birthday cake on a Weber grill. Because we didn't have an oven. Everything was made either on the grill or in a pan. We weren't impoverished, but we were an Alice family. We were a family where we had a choice if there was a crisis. We could pay for the crisis and eat less, find a cheaper place to live, or make these choices. That's what Alice households are. They're not impoverished. And the thing with Alice households is there really isn't a system of government assistance. I mean, we're above the poverty line, but we're at the crisis line. And there's a lot of families, people you don't know, people, your neighbors, your kids that I coach in Little League. I don't know. I don't go visit their house. Yes, ma'am?
May I just say that Alice, what it stands for those who might not know, it's asset limited, income constrained, but employed. So we have about 40% of our population in Walworth County who are in that Alice.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised. It's a big population. And it is people you go to church with. It is people that you go to school with. And everything's fine until it's not. And that's the challenge, because that is who's getting priced out of the market. And with the Alice households, it is single and cohabitating families. Households with children, we actually are fine. It really is, it's a lot of elderly, but it's a serious issue. The thing that's happened, especially in the rental, I don't have it up here, is what's happened with the rental properties, is I have a table, it's in the report. If you want the report, I'll send it to Bear Realty, they paid for it. He can send it to you. And Wisconsin Realtors has it, by the way. I don't know if they ever forwarded it to you. He's supposed to shake his head no.
I don't think I got it.
Okay. We're updating it every quarter, by the way. Because now that we figured out how to write it, it's not hard to rewrite. What's really going on is the housing that, how do I phrase this? If you think about it in a bar graph, I want to describe it to you. The stuff that's under 500 is now 750. The stuff that was 750 is now 1,000. The stuff that's 1,000 is now $1,800. It isn't that the housing that was 500 is nicer. It didn't suddenly become $750 housing. It's that there were people saying, I gotta live somewhere, I'll pay $750 because that's the least I can get. We need to build more housing in the $1,500 range to push the other stuff back to where it was beginning. Who does that hurt? It hurts Russ, the landlord, by the way. Because the house that everyone thinks, yeah, it's an okay house. Actually, it's a very nice house. But it keeps appreciating on me because there's nothing else over here. My comment about this, and I'm done by the way in a second, is that my master's degree is in city planning. My PhD is in mathematical economics. I'll scare you, my undergrad was in English. So I'm the weirdest person ever. Is we need planners and communities to be more agreeable to development. The barriers, and I'm not talking any specific city, I'm sure there are cities in Walworth County that are marvelous, wonderful people. But every time you create a barrier, that transaction cost gets paid by the consumer. When you say, and I'll give you my example. When I go on the committee, we would have people come to us, developers, and say, I want to build something here. And they say, well, you can't build that, it's against code. They would never say if you move it here. And I would go to the planner and I would go, why didn't you tell them just move it here? They'd come to my committee, zoning review and whatever it's called. We meet every month. We meet twice a year now. Because our planner says, well, just move it here. And the developer's like, oh, yeah. The 3, 4, 5 months it took for my committee to give them a variance, that holding cost gets passed on to the consumer. Because we're in an inelastic demand society. We don't have enough supply, we have demand, people will pay anything. So if I have to add a couple $1,000s because of holding costs, because of, there's any engineers here, irritating engineering costs, it gets passed on to someone, and if you have an inelastic demand, it gets passed on to the consumer. And if we want to create more affordable housing opportunities, we have to take down the barriers to entry to development. That's my comment. Any questions?
I thought that was just good, just a little bit of a backdrop to get going. And so I do want to introduce our, I know in the program here, but our other presenters who are here. And so Brad Lois is a realtor with Bear Realty, as Russ mentioned, but he's also the current president of the Wisconsin Realtors Association. And so, with that knowledge and the resources there, I thought just a really good person to be here, just to talk a little bit about trends and things that you're seeing right now, and sort of what Russ mentioned. But so Brad, we really appreciate you being here today, and then also Gale Price. And so Gale and I don't know when we met, probably
7, 8 years ago.
Yeah, probably that long ago, but at different economic development functions or training courses and that. And just in talking with him about what he did in his former role, so he's currently Vice President of Business Development at Blackhawk Bank, that they serve the whole region really, but I know they're based in Rock County there. But he's got a really good perspective, and I really wanted him to talk a little bit about what he did as an economic developer in the city of Janesville, because they did a summit and then actually acted on some of those things and had some good things that I hope we'll be able to use that and other examples to hopefully work with our communities, as you said, Russ, to get them a little bit more open to development and utilizing tools and just knowing that that's possible.
Thank you, Derek. So I had been with the city of Janesville for almost 20 years. I was there when GM closed. Having been a Midwestern all my life, it was a scary moment because I had seen what Janesville was faced with in other communities like Decatur, Illinois, Danville, Illinois. I grew up in Ohio. I can name off a whole litany of communities that had gone through the same thing. And so it posed a unique set of circumstances Most cities like Janesville, when they lose that major employer, have an out-migration of citizens. They, really don't become the same community. They don't look the same when they get on the backside. We had some interesting scenarios where many of the employees were transferring to other plants, but still keeping their home base in Janesville, which was really, really odd. So to give you a perspective, before GM closed, a typical year was anywhere from 180 to 230. I think our peak year of single-family development was 258 just before. And so it's 258 single-family homes, and typically we had 20 to 40 multifamily units built in a single year during those periods. And at the peak of the Great Recession, we had 39 single-family homes built and no apartment units. We had no apartment units built from basically 2007 all the way up till 2018. So, as you can imagine, landlords sat on the sidelines. They didn't want to move rents north because if they did that, they might lose the tenant because, the perception was there was a lot of supply and not as much demand. So we stayed stagnant as a community for a long period of time. And fortunately, coming out of the Great Recession, although it was a slow, very long kind of recovery period for Janesville, as a community, we started landing some major employers. Very fortunate to Dollar General, and I can name a whole host of projects that started to come to Janesville. And people's perception of Janesville and the opportunities in Janesville started to change. Along about 2017, we started getting feedback from employers that there was not enough housing. And we hadn't seen any kind of census numbers. We really didn't have a good sense of where we were at from a population standpoint, because we were all anticipating that we were going to lose population over that period of time. But we still kept getting this feedback. And ironically, we had talked to the city manager, my staff had talked to the city manager about, do we need to do a housing summit? Do we need to talk and engage the community in this issue? At the same time, we had this concern. Forward Janesville, which is Janesville's Chamber of Commerce, had a similar issue. They were looking at it from, we don't have enough executive housing. We have executives that come to Janesville, doctors and et cetera, but they weren't choosing to live in Janesville. And a lot of that feedback was, well, they don't have solid housing choices on their end of the scale. Well, rather than duplicate, and to Russ's point, my mother tongue is city planning, so all planners love to collaborate. You don't do anything in a box. So we decided, in conjunction with Forward Janesville, that we would hold a housing and development summit to talk about these issues, to get these issues out on the table. We had some other private discussions with developers out of the Madison and actually all the way over to Iowa about, how do we change these barriers to getting into the market? Because one of the things that they were seeing is there's no comps for them to be able to build a new multifamily housing development and to be able to secure rents that would make it a project that makes sense, make it something they wanted to invest in. Every project, if you're a developer, if you're a banker, you have to have a reasonable return on that investment. If you don't have that, why do you make that investment? You're going to make the investment someplace else. So we gathered, it was probably 250 people made up of city council members, planning commission members, bankers, developers, other people in the community that were associated with housing development or affordable housing. Right down to our partners like Salvation Army who, provide vouchers and temporary housing for people. We collected all these people together in one place, and we had, interactive forums to talk about all these issues. There was a whole litany of comments back, prioritized, and it really laid the groundwork for me to go to my city council and say, look, this is a real issue. We have a housing problem. We need to be a partner to solve this housing problem. it laid out the opportunity for me to walk through a change in our development policy. So the city has economic development policy. It kind of lays the groundwork for how do you engage, what does this look like, and what kind of partnership from a financial standpoint could the city provide to move forward. So walk through that process. It took almost a year to rework our policy. But that laid the framework to say, okay, City of Janesville is going to be an investor and a partner in multifamily development. The hope was that we would do this for 5 years. Market rents would come up, be able to sustain new development. We back out of it, let the market bear its own. Because we all want laissez-faire capitalism, right? In a perfect world, it should all be able to sustain itself, but it really doesn't. We also laid out for the community that we were not just going to park money on the top end of the market. We said that we were going to help both the top end of the market and the lower end of the market. And that meant we needed to be a partner in a workforce project. And we were able to do that. Now, I'll get into that in a second. But what that did was laid out those rules of engagement. It laid out the opportunity and the commitment, and that told developers that they could begin those conversations, spend some time and money with Janesville to work through a process that potentially develop projects. And that we had 3 major projects move forward. The first one was on the top end of the scale. The second one was a little bit step down, and then the third one was that workforce housing project that ended up in our downtown, which was great because the other piece to that was we had not seen 21st century multifamily vertical housing development in our downtown yet. And, every other community had it. We just had not had it. So we needed a model for what does housing in this next century look like. And so now today, where we're at, we are finishing just over 420 units over the last 4 years. And I can tell you that in one of the projects, they actually moved the later phases forward by 2 years because there is so much demand for that product. The beauty of the workforce project was threefold, really. One was that we're providing affordable housing for workforce. And when we think of workforce, a lot of times people think, well, that's, Section 8 housing or, all the other things that just make it sound bad. And we actually presented other community leaders in our city council, well, look at this list of city employees that would be able to qualify for this housing. That's an eye-opener for your community leaders to say, oh, wow, geez, are we not paying enough? Or is it just that, workforce housing is helping people get started in their career? And in many cases, it's teachers just out of college. And that's a good thing. The second piece was that when we were talking to companies about coming to Janesville, and they learned of our commitment to being a housing partner, we've actually been able to land companies because they know that the workforce can live in Janesville, or the city's going to help be a partner in that. The third one was when the city of Janesville went out for a bond rating, and the piece of the conversation in the bond call was that we are a partner in multifamily and workforce housing that actually gained credit for the city when the bond issuers and the bond raters looked at what we were doing. It was something I never imagined. But it actually gave us points when we went out for our bond rating. And I could talk about all the nuances of the development agreements, but and I'll be up here later for questions. But that community engagement made all the difference in the world, because if we had not had that engagement in the housing summit, we would have never got to a point where we could have been a partner and been able to develop as many units as we have today. Now, we didn't anticipate, all the craziness of the pandemic and lumber prices going up and those kind of things. I don't think the city's going to be out of the partnering business for a while because of that. Maybe lumber is a slide down. I keep seeing reports that it has in the last 4 weeks, but Long and the short of it is there's gonna need to be other things that the city does over the long term, those barriers to entry that need to be addressed, at all levels. It's not only just on the multifamily, but there's other barriers. I think if you're familiar with Janesville, almost every house is a ranch house on a 1/4 acre lot. That's not sustainable. We need more opportunities for developers to build product that has an entry point that's lower because those costs are defrayed over more lots and things like that. So again, I'd love to have lunch with you, Russ, and talk about those philosophicals because I see it every day. And as a banker, how do I get comfortable with being a partner in investment in some of those projects?
As was mentioned earlier, my name is Brad Lois. I'm a real estate broker. I'm not a developer. So keep that, in mind with the lens of the conversation that I have. I've been brokering real estate transactions for 16 years, based in Burlington, and I'm currently the chairman of the board for the Wisconsin Realtors Association. So I have a lot of statistical data, and Russ stole all of it this morning already, as he cited a bunch of his sources. But I've got some other stuff that our government affairs director, Doug Wheaton, provided me with some really good information as well to touch on. So a couple of things that I'll point out, because it's been mentioned a handful of times already today. There's always this conversation about workforce housing or affordable housing, and what is it? And I'll point to a resource that you all have the ability to access if you want to at some point in time. If you go to WRA.org, which is the Wisconsin Realtors Association webpage, we have a report that was put together in 2018 by Dr. Kurt Paulson from UW-Madison and the Grass Camp Real Estate Center. And it's called the Falling Behind Report. We took that report as a study of the entire state to try to understand our housing shortage, where it came from, how it happened, and what we need to do, and try to find some resources to move forward from that perspective. And then that's what we use from the Lakes Area Realtors Association that provided the funding to Russ and his class and his team to be able to put together the Walworth County housing report. Is the same concept. We want to understand locally what the impact of that housing shortage is here, and then be able to bring that information in a digestible fashion back to municipalities to use that information to help solve this problem. So I point out that resource, like I said, because it's information that everybody has access to. There's a lot of interesting data that's in it. But I want to start with, it's like page 1 or page 2 of that report is defining what workforce housing is. Because we heard from the government side of it earlier this morning, even the confusion on what that is, workforce and affordable and subsidized housing. It's none of those things. So the punchline is that when you look at the average home, I'm going to backtrack just for a second. This is information Doug provided to me this morning. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the rate of inflation since 2012 in Walworth County is 29%. However, during this time, median home prices in Walworth County from 2012 until the first 5 months of 2022 went from a $150,000 home in 2012 is now a $299,950 home, increased by 100%. Not the 29% inflation that we've been dealing with. Coincidentally, a $300,000 home is exactly what we define workforce housing to be in Walworth County. So the definition of workforce housing as defined in our Falling Behind report is you take an area's median income, and 60% of that median income is what a renter would typically use for their housing for their housing choice. And if you're a owner of a home, it would be 120% of that median income. So you probably saw me on my phone earlier while Russ was speaking. I apologize, but I was looking up Walworth County's median income, $66,000. So if you take $66,000 times 60%, it's $39,000. We heard earlier a couple times as well, people generally use about a third of that towards housing. So you take $39,000, a third of that is $13,000, divide by 12 months, that's $1,100 a month apartment. By no means would anybody consider an $1,100 a month apartment to be something that's subsidized or, that's just simply affordable in Walworth County. So when we ask to try to build and to get some flexibility, some sort of programmatic assistance with developers when we're trying to create workforce housing, it's creating apartments that can be rented for $1,100 a month and homes that can be purchased for $300,000. So I think that's an incredibly point to be understood, is that when we talk about this concept of workforce housing and what we need and the demand for it, that it's not a dirty word. It's something that we're simply trying to provide the housing, again, as mentioned earlier, that's affordable for the workforce in a particular community. So to do that, one of the things that we talk about as well from the Realtor Association perspective is trying to encourage municipalities to say yes to developers. There's a lot of research that's done from municipal perspectives and from universities to help provide data to answer some of these questions. But at the end of the day, the private market always does research on the projects that they're trying to do, and they have a reason they're proposing something in a particular area that's driven by the financial metrics that the project would need to be successful. So we've had over the last several years projects that we've seen that are, I'll use the word creative. And it's something new, and it's something different. And a lot of times we get, not necessarily from a governmental perspective, but from the residents within communities themselves, we have another dirty word that we use all the time in real estate, that's NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And that's something that we have to figure out a way to overcome that as well. Because at the end of the day, if it's not in your backyard, where's it supposed to go? And all it's continuing to do is draw out this shortage of supply that we have, and push values up to unaffordable levels where we don't have people to work in our workforce, don't have people here in our businesses, creates all sorts of problems for us across the board. Like I said, the developers are researching these market-specific projects before they're bringing them forward with their proposals. I'll give a couple of examples of different things that aren't often thought about, but make a whole lot of sense to be able to solve some of the problems that we have. There's two things that are going on in the real estate market right now, specifically that are impacting the shortage that we have, outside of the fact that we simply aren't building enough homes. But we currently have a situation where we have the second largest demographic of people, which is the baby boomer generation, holding onto their homes from the millennials, who is now the largest generation of population. They're trying to buy the boomers' homes. The boomers don't have any places to go, so they're not selling. They're staying in place. So being able to look at, again, I was referencing earlier, things that developers bring as market-specific projects. There's a lot of opportunity in being able to create. I won't generally say senior housing as the option for boomers to move into. As I heard earlier, that the range of that age demographic is 57 to 76. But there's other opportunities. There's condo projects. There's ranch-style communities where you have smaller lots where you can build more homes, create more density, so that you have places to move. Generally, as you think about it as well, the boomers have more money in their pockets to be able to go and spend on new construction projects that are more expensive today than they were in 2012, like we just talked about before. What that also does is creates opportunities for the millennials to then buy those homes that are usually older housing population, older housing stock, and they probably have more energy to be able to go and put money into and time and effort into remodeling those homes to bring them forward into the new era. Another interesting thought that we've seen, and we actually proposed from the Wisconsin Realtors Association into local municipalities earlier this year, is the concept of being able to retrofit older commercial buildings or even retail buildings into housing stock. You think about what's happened to retail over the last few years and how much retail has gone online. You think about things like Amazon and the amount of boxes that show up at your front door. We have in several communities, not necessarily just Walworth County, but we have in several communities big box stores that are sitting dark and empty. We have retail stores in downtowns that are being rented for far too little money in comparison to what they were constructed for originally, simply because retail throughout downtowns that expanded in a different way years before didn't have to compete with Amazon. Retail can't compete the same way that it used to. So using the ability to rework and retrofit some of those properties into residential opportunities is something that we ask municipalities to be flexible and open to. Again, from the concept of, there's some very old and outdated zoning code and zoning ordinances out there that simply say you can't have residential on a main floor of a building in a commercial district. Why not? If it makes sense, why not allow for things like that to happen? I'll stop there. I know we have more questions to come, but just some things to start thinking about relative to the demand and some of the potential solutions that are there to solve that problem.
It's great, really great information, and boy, the time flew by here. I do want to make sure that we have some time for some questions, so go ahead in the back there.
I have a question for Brad regarding those greenfield developments that you brought up. Those are actually really popular in other areas. What are some of the main concerns that you're hearing here in local municipalities?
What kind
against it? Because it's not a NIMBism.
What kind of developments? I missed that.
The gray fields, the old commercials, retrofitting those are gray field types of development. What are some of the reasons you're hearing outside of the not in my backyard?
Well, I'll give you an example. 'Cause I actually have to live in this world. If you have a downtown with a series of ex-businesses, that the city is saying someday retail's coming back to downtown, because they believe this. You have a window issue. If you have building next to each other, you only have windows in the front and in the back, you don't have on the sides. And there's egress and ingress restrictions that have to be accommodated for, but that are used as basically clubs to bludgeon developers from developing them. Let's be blunt. There has to be a creative solution to take care of that safety issue. And now that's just one that always comes to mind with me.
Yeah, you mentioned the word safety, and that's a roadblock that I've heard as well, is safety not necessarily from an ingress, egress, health and safety perspective, but I've heard municipalities talk about safety from component of having residential in a commercial area from safety at night. When the business is closed and you're bringing more people to be downtown when those businesses are closed, that's a lot of times when you have restaurants that are restocking, you have bars that are getting cleaned, you have various different types of things that happen in a business after hours. From that perspective, when you bring more people specifically to be living in that area, there's more potential for there to be safety issues with those additional people that have never been in those areas historically from a business's perspective.
And then you have the building code perspective, which if you have more than 2 residential units in a building, the fire marshal is going to say you need to sprinkle in this building. And that is an insane barrier to trying to rehab some of these older downtown buildings, because then you're talking about cutting up the street, cutting up whatever streetscape they have there, and you're talking anywhere from $3 to $5, $6 a square foot to make that happen. And why have personally seen projects just go away that the financial numbers make sense, but then the owner just doesn't want to be on the hook for long-term maintenance of the sprinkler system, because you've got monitoring and then you've got the testing every year. That's anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000.
It's a really interesting problem though to deal with, that I think we'll have to come up with some solutions. John, go ahead.
What are the primary financial things that the community can do to help a developer with new housing development?
We heard this earlier as well, and I was kind of surprised that it didn't come up in these terms. We heard specifically about the $20 million in ARPA funds that Walworth County received. Well, what we didn't hear is any specificity. There's some related to broadband, but one of the things that the Wisconsin Realtors Association was pushing for earlier this year is to encourage municipalities to invest that money into infrastructure for new housing ahead of time to make it more affordable to build those new homes, because it's an investment in the future. It creates a larger tax base. We already know the expense of building and constructing new homes is higher than it's ever been before today. So any assistance in creating that up front and taking the cost of that out of the developer's hands from the beginning is a step in the right direction. So municipalities using some of those ARPA funds, those one-time dollars, not in programmatic ways, but in systematic ways to design for investment into the future is something that we've always encouraged.
It was good to hear earlier that there was actually somebody using ARPA funds for housing, because as a community in Janesville, our city manager chose not to, even though the community has talked at length about how housing affordability is a major issue. From the multifamily standpoint, using tax increment financing was the major tool for the city of Janesville. We were fortunate, and there's a couple of different ways you can go about it, and I'll try to do it very briefly here, but we had some successful tax increment districts that we were able to expand. It had monies that had built up the pot very well, and we were able to front finance phases of one of those developments, and that ends up being basically money that goes into their permanent financing, which the cost of the city money was less than what a bank would have been charging in interest. You know, again, helps to create that that margin that's needed in the project to make it make sense. On one of the other projects, the city took debt, and again, it was a fair amount of risk. But in the end, the way the debt came in on our bond rating, and the fact that the project is overperformed, the bond's going to be paid off in probably 14 years rather than what was anticipated was to be 20. The third way to do it is pay as you go, and that is just basically you're returning a percentage of the real property tax that is created by the development back to the developer. Now, in other states, they call it tax abatement. Can't do that in Wisconsin. You have to have a contract that says we're going to return it after you paid it. In that particular project, we had, 90% of the real property tax return. So it's based on performance. So if the building underperforms, city doesn't pay the full amount. But the larger community issue was the need for the housing. So, we really still benefit, even though that real property tax is getting returned back to the developer to help close that gap.
Great, okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I'm really impressed that this conversation is happening. And with the level of data from UW-Whitewater new research, Realtors Association who actually care about this and want to, and are advocating for this, and then just the model that has happened in Janesville. I mean, from the front lines, a lot of the grassroots organizations are seeing this, it's drinking from the fire hose. But as the community health assessment plan showed that there's siloed municipalities, how do we as a county help mobilize those municipalities to listen to this, to then want to make those simple moves of moving the zoning one step over or changing a code one step over, so that we can have more kids in the schools, more workers in our workforce, and just that community that's wanting to take care of each other. I guess, how did you do that, Gale? Like, how did you do? And I mean, I know
2
that.
minutes are left. Sorry.
One of the taglines we used is, do you want your kids to stay in this community? That said a lot to people. We all know that there's an out-migration of our young minds out of this state. They see the opportunities. They get educated at our great colleges and then say, hey, there's great opportunities to make money someplace else. That was a big piece for us. What do you want your community to look like? And we're fortunate enough to have some people starting to move in, the Shine Medical Technologies, bringing people that have been in other communities to say, hey, we want this as product. We're seeing people who, the baby boomers are traveling going, hey, why doesn't our community have stuff like this? They're making conscious choices. And when those words are said to city council members, that gets their attention. And they have to rethink this. We have to rethink what our communities look like. The comprehensive plans can't be all cookie cutters. They have to embrace change. They have to embrace the financial metrics and the marketability of your community.
Just like one more quick
Yeah,
question.
it's just a quick question. I'm from Lake Geneva, so we're trying to tackle workplace housing, but all of our affordable housing is being gobbled up by short-term rentals. So that's a real issue in the community I'm in. Why would we build more affordable housing when it's just going to be purchased by people that are using it as short-term rentals?
Go ahead.
I think one of the problems that we face is that in order to attract, we know this, in order to attract businesses, new businesses, expanding businesses, we need housing. Do they care about taxes? Of course they care about taxes, but the first thing they want to know is who's going to work here. And this has to be communicated. The problem that I see with cities is that they are very myopic in viewing the problems that they have today instead of anticipating the problems they're going to have tomorrow. I spend my life beating on this. I don't want to be the great city that becomes challenged. I don't want to be San Francisco. That's who I do not want to be. I don't want to say we have enough housing to take care of ourselves. I want to say we have enough housing to take care of the next generation. It's an education problem and it's communication. And we just need to keep beating on this. Lake Geneva is in a great place today. Where does Lake Geneva want to be 10, 20 years from now? And if you're not planning for then we end up back at 2010 leading up to 2020.
Brent, do you have one last comment? And then I'll.
Yeah, I would add to that, you can't halt something because of, to Russ's point, the current problem. And I say it as a problem from a perspective that we as a Realtors Association actually supported legislation to allow the right to rent, but with governance to it. Not just simply for it to be wide open, not for it to not have any rules attached to it, but for there to be rules surrounding the ability to do this short-term rental option. And if there's creation of units, and currently they're going to short-term housing, to Russ's point, that's the problem of today. But what it does do for the municipality is it still increases tax base. Regardless of who's using that property, it's still paying property taxes, and it's still creating base for the community to expand programs and things outside of what's currently there.
Well, good. I know we're over here, but I want to thank everybody. I want to thank our presenters for being here. Thanks for your time today. Again, thank you.